Welcome to the Teaching Football Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Debates. Thank you for watching and sharing with your family and friends, and remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of this video. In this episode, we're going to touch base on a previous video that we did and take a look at what's happening in the NFL right now. I'm going to talk about undrafted players and how they can potentially have success with NFL teams. And at the end, we're going to talk about some upcoming changes as the NFL season arrives and some things that you can look for and watch for in the upcoming NFL season. For starters, we want to touch base with a previous episode that we did, the value of the preseason. In that episode, we talked about the value of the NFL preseason, if there really is value in it, and what teams can learn from it. And one of the things that we talked about was injuries and how starters sitting out the preseason games doesn't necessarily protect them from injuries. They can happen at any time. Just by example, so far this year, on the very first practice of the season, the Carolina Panthers lost a potential starting outside linebacker to a torn ACL. And then a few days later, they lost one of their draft picks, a third or fourth round receiver from Tennessee, who tore one of the ligaments in one of his knees, either the medial collateral ligament, the MCL, or the lateral collateral ligament, the LCL. Those are on the outsides of the knee to help maintain stability. So they lost two players right away. The New Orleans Saints on back-to-back days lost a starting defensive tackle and a key reserve offensive lineman, both of them to ACL injuries. The Cardinals, for the fourth year in a row, have potentially lost a drafted offensive lineman to a potential season-ending injury. Now, theirs happened in their first preseason game this year, but in previous years, they've lost players in practice. The San Francisco 49ers so far this year, in one practice, they had 20 players sitting out with a variety of injuries. Most of them, if not all of them, soft tissue injuries. And they did lose a potential starting wide receiver to a knee injury to his PCL, his posterior cruciate ligament, that helps stabilize the knee along with the ACL. And that's just 4 teams so far this year. I haven't even done a deep tracking of all those injuries. But if you want to know more about what I said, check out the value of the preseason video. And that's where I talked about injuries can happen at any time. And just by keeping starters out doesn't protect them. Getting into this episode, we're going to talk about undrafted players. Undrafted players make NFL teams every year. Sometimes they make it as a result of an injury, like we just talked about. Sometimes they supplant a player that's been with the team for 2 or 3 years and doesn't seem to be progressing. Sometimes they defy the odds and end up starting for teams. And some of these players eventually become key starters on playoff teams, Super Bowl champions, and a few have even made the NFL Hall of Fame. We'll talk about those players here as we go. But we're going to start with a quote from Barry Sanders. Barry, who was small, light on his feet, and was one of the best football players of all time, in my opinion, said, "It doesn't matter how big or how tall or wide you are. It has to do with your desire and ability." And that's what these undrafted players can do. It doesn't matter how big or how tall they are. You have smaller receivers making it all the time. You have offensive linemen that appear to be too slow, but are able to stick with the team and be successful. In fact, one of the key positions that I'm going to watch this year is a potential starting right tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs. With Patrick Mahomes coming off a knee injury, and the Chiefs' offensive line being in flux the last few years, so far they've had an undrafted rookie taking the majority of snaps at right tackle. It's been a problem position for them for about the last 3 or 4 years, and they might have found a good player who is undrafted to protect one of the best players in the NFL. So those are the types of players that we're looking at. We're starting with the quarterbacks. First one, Tony Romo, undrafted player for the Cowboys. While he never won a Super Bowl and is more known for some of his playoff problems and now better known for being an announcer, he was a very successful undrafted quarterback who made 4 Pro Bowls. Then you have Warren Moon, who wasn't drafted. Some believe, and I think there's justification to this, that he wasn't drafted in the NFL because he was black. He eventually made a name for himself in Canada, winning championships up there, and eventually ended up in the NFL and is now a Hall of Famer. And one of the best known undrafted underdog stories you have is Kurt Warner, who led the Rams to Super Bowl after getting in for an injured player. Kurt Warner comes in, and you have to remember, he didn't just lead the Rams to victory with the greatest show on turf. 2 years later, he led them back to the Super Bowl where they lost to the Patriots to start Tom Brady's run. And then a few years later, with the Arizona Cardinals, he took them to the Super Bowl and nearly won that one. So here you have 3 undrafted quarterbacks, 2 of whom have made the Hall of Fame. So you can find talent everywhere. Next, you have running backs. I only have 2 listed here. One is Marion Motley, who played for the Cleveland Browns earlier, pre-Super Bowl era. But he's a Hall of Fame running back. Dominant. He also played on the defensive side of the ball. He played linebacker, he played running back. He was a simple force of nature. And then you have Priest Holmes, who played for a few different teams, best known for a very successful few years in Kansas City, where he had 3 Pro Bowl seasons and an All-Pro season. Next, you have the wide receivers and tight ends. Now, this is kind of a limited group, especially the tight ends. There aren't a lot of great undrafted tight ends. And you saw that with the running backs. They only had 2 running backs. The skill position players are more likely to be found in the draft. But the first one we have is one of my all-time favorite players, and yes, being a little bit of a Broncos homer, is Rod Smith. He was a starting wide receiver on their 2 Super Bowl championship teams in Super Bowl 32 and 33. He was the first undrafted wide receiver ever to have 10,000 yards receiving. At one time, he held just about every Denver Broncos receiving record. His very first touchdown catch was a game winner from John Elway over Hall of Fame cornerback Darrell Green. And I once read in an interview that his favorite game of his NFL career was Super Bowl 32, where he had 0 catches. But they won the Super Bowl. That's a player who appreciates the work that he had to go through to get on the team and get on that championship stage. And he appreciated that championship, even though that first Super Bowl they won, he didn't have any catches. The next one is Wes Welker. 5 Pro Bowls, 2 first-team All-Pro teams, was one of the best slot receivers, I think, ever to play the game. He's one that if he ended up in the Hall of Fame, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But he did stand out for undrafted receivers. Next, you have the one tight end that was on this list. Number 85, Antonio Gates for the Chargers. He is in the Hall of Fame. Well-deserved. He was a basketball player in college, used his basketball skills to translate into being a force, especially in the red zone, boxing out defensive backs or linebackers or whoever was trying to cover him and getting touchdowns. He had incredible hands and is more than well-deserved in the Hall of Fame. And the last wide receiver you have is Drew Pearson, who was with the Cowboys in the 70s and the 80s, Hall of Fame wide receiver. Again, undrafted. Connection with Roger Staubach, was a great, versatile receiver for the Cowboys, again, in the late 70s and early 80s. Now, I'm not saying that these are the only running backs, quarterbacks, and receivers. I'm sure I missed a few players. There are some good ones that I'm sure I missed. However, most of the lists that I came across when I was researching this, these are the players that came up over and over and over again. Most of them are the ones that had the most Pro Bowls, most All-Pro teams, or were significant in some way. So I'm not leaving anybody out intentionally. I may have missed a few players here and there. Now moving on to the offensive line. This is where we saw the largest number of undrafted players. Once again, I'm sure I missed a few players, but this group I think is very impressive. 7 offensive linemen, 41 Pro Bowls, 17 first-team All-Pro appearances, and 14 Super Bowl rings. In fact, the only one that didn't get a Super Bowl is the first one, Brian Waters. I remember watching him play for the Kansas City Chiefs. He was just a force. 6-time Pro Bowler, 2-time first-team All-Pro, and he played in an era when there were a lot of really good guards in the NFL in the 80s and 90s, where he might have been overshadowed by a few players sometimes, where there just weren't basically enough Pro Bowl positions or All-Pro positions to go around. Great player, very good player for Kansas City for a long time. Next, you have Larry Little. 5 Pro Bowls, 5-time first-team All-Pro, 2 Super Bowl wins with the Miami Dolphins. He's got a teammate with him, number 62, Jim Langer, another Hall of Fame undrafted offensive lineman with the Miami Dolphins of those great teams of the 70s, including the one that went undefeated. You have number 61, Nate Newton of the Dallas Cowboys of the 90s teams. The right guard was Larry Allen, who's in the Hall of Fame and is considered one of the best offensive linemen ever, or one of the best offensive guards ever. Nate Newton, I don't think he falls in the category of one of the best offensive guards ever. I wouldn't have a problem with him being voted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. 6 Pro Bowls, 2 times first team All-Pro, and you have a Hall of Famer Larry Allen on the other side. No wonder Emmitt Smith was the all-time rushing leader. And then 3 Super Bowl rings. Next is Jason Peters, who became the gold standard for several years as an offensive tackle. 9 Pro Bowls, 2-time first team All-Pro, and a Super Bowl ring. Next, you have number 66 on the bottom, Joe Jacoby of the Washington Redskins, part of the Hogs of the 1980s, an undrafted lineman who became part of one of the best offensive line groups for an entire decade. 4 Pro Bowls, 3 times first team All-Pro, 3 Super Bowl rings, undrafted. And Bart Oates, who's a center for the New York Giants in the 80s, and he finished his career with San Francisco. 5 Pro Bowls, 3 Super Bowl rings, 2 with the Giants and 1 with the 49ers. An amazing group of offensive linemen. Right now, only 2 Hall of Famers. Could be more eventually. Jason Peters might have a case for it. Nate Newton might have a case for it. Remember, these were all undrafted players. Now looking at the defensive side of the ball. And we're going to start with a quote by Chuck Noll, Steelers head coach of the 70s. Good things come to those who hustle. I think he has more than enough clout to go with that quote. 4 Super Bowls in the 70s, and they found several late round draft steals, but they also did find 1 future Hall of Famer that is on this list, and we'll get to him in a few minutes. We start with the defensive line. Now this is actually one of the weaker groups. Outstanding defensive linemen, high quality defensive linemen are usually found in the draft. You don't have a lot of good quality defensive linemen that slip through the cracks and go undrafted, but there were a few. First one is Coy Bacon, number 79. Played mostly with the Chargers, but he played with several teams throughout the years. A 3-time Pro Bowler, not Hall of Fame material, not an All-Pro, but he did lead the NFL in sacks one year with, I think it was like 15 and a half, but a good solid defensive line player. Next you have John Randall, number 93. Arguably one of the best defensive tackles ever. Undersized. He was very aggressive, relentless, outstanding player, and he is in the Hall of Fame, but remember, he went undrafted. And lastly, Cameron Wake, who made 5 Pro Bowls, mostly with the Miami Dolphins. He played with a few other teams. But for a couple of years, he was a force to be reckoned with, and he was the guy that that offensive lines had to account for every time they lined up. And he played around the same time as Jason Taylor and Zach Thomas, 2 other Hall of Famers. So working with those 3 players, that's a good start for those Miami defensive teams. Next, you have some linebackers. First one is James Harrison, undrafted for the Steelers, best known for his 100-yard interception return to Kurt Warner in the Super Bowl with the Cardinals and the Steelers, taking back from the touchdown. 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time first-team All-Pro, and a Defensive Player of the Year award. Next, you have London Fletcher, who played in the league. It seemed like forever. He played on 6 or 7 different teams, I think it was. Played, I think, around 16 seasons in the NFL. 4-time Pro Bowler, but once again, a good player who went undrafted, apparently overlooked, but he made a name for himself because he hustled, because it didn't matter how big or how tall he was. He just hustled. Next, you have Sam Mills, Hall of Famer. He played with the New Orleans Saints in the 1980s. They ran a 3-4 defense, and he was one of the 4 linebackers that was known as a Dome Patrol. I think one year, all 4 of them made the Pro Bowl in the same year. Sam Mills is a Hall of Fame. He was small, 5'9", 5'10", not a huge linebacker. Became an outstanding player and coach for the Carolina Panthers. Unfortunately, he lost a battle with cancer and has passed away, but he was a Hall of Famer who a lot of people said wasn't big enough to play in the NFL. Well, he definitely proved people wrong. And the last one is Jesse Tuggle, who played mostly for the Atlanta Falcons in the mid to late 90s. He was on the Super Bowl team that made it to Super Bowl 33, but he is a 5-time Pro Bowler also. I think this is a little bit surprising with the emphasis on cornerbacks, on defensive backs in the NFL. But you have 6 cornerbacks that went undrafted. The first one, I'll admit, is another little bit of a being a Bronco homer, is Chris Harris Jr. He was part of the no-fly zone that won Super Bowl 50, 4-time Pro Bowler, 1 first-team All-Pro, but he went nearly 2 years without surrendering a touchdown pass. And he could play outside, he could play in the slot, very versatile corner, very aggressive corner, and he played in Kansas with Aqib Talib, and they both ended up playing in the no-fly zone and helped Denver win a Super Bowl. Next one, number 18, Emmitt Thomas, Kansas City Chiefs, Hall of Famer in the late 60s, early 70s with the Super Bowl IV Chiefs. So you had three linebackers with the Chiefs that are Hall of Famers, two of whom are considered two of the best linebackers to play at their positions. And now you have an undrafted corner who's a Hall of Famer in Emmitt Thomas. That's an amazing defense. Next, you have number 34, Cornell Green. Played with a few different teams, best known for playing with the Dallas Cowboys of the 70s. 5 Pro Bowls, 3 first-team All-Pro seasons. Next, you have Willie Wood of the Green Bay Packers, followed by Willie Brown of the Oakland Raiders. Both number 24, both undrafted cornerbacks, both Hall of Famers. So you can find those great defensive backs after the draft is over, and some of those players can make a name for themselves. And the last undrafted player who we've talked about previously in a couple other episodes, talking about the Upper Room Hall of Fame, is Dick Night Train Lane of the Detroit Lions of the 50s. Still holds the NFL record with 14 interceptions in his rookie year. Next, you have the safeties. Just 4 safeties in this group, but 2 of them belong to the Dallas Cowboys. Number 40 is Bill Bates, number 41, Charlie Waters. Bates played in the 90s with those great Cowboys teams and has a couple of Super Bowl rings to his name. Charlie Waters was with the Cowboys of the 70s, has a Super Bowl ring there. They were both outstanding players for their era. Bill Bates, I remember watching him play. He was a physical safety, played almost like a linebacker at times, in a sense kind of like an early nickel or dime type of linebacker in that 5 defensive back set. Then you have number 45, Dave Grayson of the Oakland Raiders. He played in the 70s. 6 Pro Bowls, 4 first-team All-Pros. As a safety, at that time, you had to be a physical, hard-hitting player. He played alongside Jack Tatum, Hall of Famer Willie Brown. Raiders had some really good players in the 70s. And we're going to look at another one. Number 31, Hall of Famer Donnie Shell, who was with the Steelers for all 4 of their Super Bowls in the 70s. 3 of the 4 safeties played during the 70s, and they were all undrafted. It's an outstanding collection of talent for undrafted players. We can't forget about the specialists. 2 kickers and a punter. First one is Adam Vinatieri, who just got into the Hall of Fame, kicking for the Patriots and Colts. We talked about him in our Upper Room Hall of Fame video. Only player in NFL history to score 1,000 points with 2 different teams. Next you have Lou Groza, who played for a bunch of different teams, most notably the Cleveland Browns. He was one of the first great kickers in NFL history, if not the first great kicker in NFL history. And the last one is Jeff Fiegels, who played mostly with the New York Giants, but he played with a bunch of different teams in the NFL. He did win a Super Bowl. He was an undrafted punter. So undrafted players can be successful and contributors to championship teams. This list alone has 16 Hall of Famers, and 41 times these players were Super Bowl champions. Once again, I might have missed a few players, might have missed a couple of Hall of Famers, might have missed a few people who won Super Bowls that went undrafted. I apologize for that if I missed your favorite player. But that's something that you can watch for in the upcoming season. Look for those undrafted players if they're playing for your favorite team. See how well they do. See if they're playing week in, week out. See if they move up the depth chart and become starters or key reserves. Because a lot of these players, they benefited with an injury to a starter, or they made a big play in the preseason, or they just consistently did the right things week in and week out that got them noticed by the coaches. A lot of these players ended up contributing, starting, maybe helped a Super Bowl champion, or maybe they made it to the Hall of Fame. So that's something that you can look for as a fan during this upcoming season. So that concludes the Teaching Football podcast this first off season. Now we're going to get into the season. And here at the Teaching Football podcast, I'm going to try to help you fans better understand the game, especially you newer fans. So each week what I'm going to do is talk about a particular college or NFL game. Talk about the things that I'm looking for. It could be a player, could be a position group, could be a strategy, could be the offense, defense, could be what the coaches are doing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to preview what I'm looking for in each game. Then the following week, I'm going to come back and give you my analysis of what I saw for each particular group or player or position that I was watching that week. I'll tell you what I thought, what I saw, And if you want to go back and watch the highlights of the game again, you can see if you saw the same things that I saw when watching the game. So for example, the first week of the NFL season, the Monday night game is a big game between the Broncos and the Chiefs. Something that I'm going to be watching for is the quarterbacks. Both quarterbacks are coming off injuries. Bo Nix broke his ankle and missed the AFC Championship game. Patrick Mahomes is coming off a knee injury. How do those quarterbacks fare? How do they move against those defenses? Arguably two of the best defenses in the NFL. How is the Chiefs' offensive line going to adjust? They've been in flux for the last couple of years. They've brought in a lot of younger players. And potentially they could have an undrafted right tackle protecting Patrick Mahomes. How is he going to fare? The Chiefs' wide receiver core has been struggling the last few years. They're not as explosive, it seems like, as they were 5, 6, 7 years ago when they started this playoff run, this Super Bowl run that they've had. How are they going to step up? Is Denver's defense going to dominate? They had 68 sacks last year. How is that undrafted right tackle for Kansas City, if he starts, how is he going to play against that Denver defense? But one thing Denver's defense didn't do last year is they didn't get turnovers. They only had 14 turnovers in the entire season. A great championship defense forces a lot more than 14 turnovers. So those are going to be some of the things that I'm going to look for in the first week of the season. And then the following week, I'm going to give you my analysis of what I saw, what Denver's defense did, how the quarterbacks played, the offensive lines, the receivers. And then you can go back and watch the highlights and see if you can see what I'm seeing and see if you agree with me. But I'm going to do this throughout the entire season. But I am going to stick with the over-the-air games, games on ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox. Those are free to everyone. And a lot of times those are the games that are the big matchups. So anyone can watch them at any time. The NFL games, I'm mostly going to focus on the Sunday night games because those a lot of times are the biggest games of the year. Or, excuse me, those a lot of times are the biggest games of the week. And often they include interesting storylines. So those are going to be some of the things that I'm going to watch for, preview each week, and come back and review the following week. For the college games, I'm going to be looking at the biggest matchups that I can see. Yes, you might miss some of the games, or I might see different games than you because of regional coverage. But most of the big college games on Saturday nights, the largest Big Ten games or the most important Big Ten game of the weekend is going to be on NBC oftentimes. CBS and Fox and ABC are going to cover the other conferences, get those big games. So I'm going to be watching those games, previewing them, tell you what I'm going to look for, and then once again, come back the following week. I'm going to give you my analysis, the things that I saw from what I was watching for. So for example, in week 0 of college football, the week before the NFL starts, the weekend of September 6th, two of the games that I'm going to try to watch are LSU versus Clemson. You have LSU with new head coach Lane Kiffin, who left Ole Miss after the regular season was over, but before the playoffs. And we'll see how his players adjust to his new offense, which he's one of the better offensive minds in college football. So we'll see how his team adjusts to that. The other team, Clemson, they've struggled the last few years on offense. They've had a number of offensive coordinators over the last few years. I've lost track of how many they have. They've had very good players, quite a bit of talent, but they haven't been able to make it gel and haven't been able to put it all together. So that's something we're going to watch on that side of the ball. I'm also going to try to watch the Louisville versus Ole Miss game. The biggest thing I'm going to watch for in that is Ole Miss under their new head coach taking over for Lane Kiffin. How do they play? They had a good run in the college football playoff last year. If Kiffin had stayed, would they maybe have made it to the national championship game? We don't know. So we'll have to see how those players react to the offense and defense that they're running this year. And I'm also picking LSU and Ole Miss that first week because later on in the year, they do play each other. And I believe that's going to be a game on ABC. So we'll have to watch those two teams early in the season. And then when they play each other, we'll have to watch and see what happens in that game. I think when LSU and Ole Miss play, I think it's pretty much even money that there's going to be a fight or a brawl at some point during the game. A lot of the Ole Miss players don't like Kiffin. Several of the Ole Miss players left after the season and went to LSU. So there could be a lot of bad blood there. So hopefully that's a good football game, but it'll be very interesting to watch that all together. So those are some of the things that we're going to be looking for in this upcoming NFL season. We're going to take it all the way through, try and get to you specific games each week, try and give you the best analysis that I can. And the goal is to help you new fans of the game better understand various aspects of the game that you can look for and watch and study and learn from. And for you existing fans, maybe it's a way for you to watch the game in a little bit different way and maybe improve your knowledge, or maybe hopefully give you more enjoyment for the game that we all love. So that concludes this episode of the Teaching Football Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Debates. Thank you for watching and sharing with your family and friends. Don't forget to look for those previews and reviews coming up during this upcoming season, and we'll see you on our next episode.